Just really excited to be here. It's been an amazing conference. Thank you, Nico. Really fun and fun to see so many friends, and there's just an incredible energy here. I feel like we could easily bleed into the weekend and beyond if we were allowed. What I wanted to talk about was a few things. I think I wanted to talk about kind of some of the themes that we've been discussing at this conference this week, kind of technology and change and innovation. Also talk about that in the context of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then focus a bit about some of our technology work, specifically smart grants, other activities. And I think if there's an overriding kind of theme to this conference this week, it's this idea that that transportation is a values-based enterprise. It's sort of like a principled enterprise, and I actually don't think that that's like an instinctive reaction that people across the country have. They don't think about transportation as a values-based enterprise, and I think that they think about transportation as the things that that they've experienced all their lives. And if we keep the transportation system exactly the way it is, it probably won't be a values-based enterprise. You know, repaving a road is not really, other than deciding where to repave a road, I suppose, but it's not really a values-based enterprise. And I think that when we're changing the system, it's really where you see values play out. And I really commend this group for, I think, all the work that that you've brought to all of your efforts, where you're really pushing transportation as a values-based system. And so at DOT, we have a set of what we call innovation principles that really guide our work on change and innovation. And I wanted to talk a bit about what these look like. And so the first, and I think that in general, and I think one thing I'll talk about is how these principles apply both to the ways that we think about technology, but also the ways we think about changing our physical infrastructure. And so I'll highlight some of the efforts that we have at the department on that subject. So the first concept is that innovation should be guided by and support our policy priorities. And for us at DOT, that means safety, acknowledging that we have a roadway fatality crisis. We lose 43,000 people a year in the last couple of years, and that number has been growing over the course of, or had been growing over the course of the pandemic. It's an urgent challenge, an urgent problem that needs to be addressed. That includes 10,000 or so pedestrians and cyclists. I think everyone here probably knows about too deeply and is motivated by this challenge. It also focuses on climate, as Gabe was talking about. You know, transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in our country, and we must reverse that in our transportation system. It's about equity, knowing that where you live, what transportation you have access to, guides your ability to get to work, to get to the doctor's office, to get groceries. It affects the air that you breathe. And also that transportation is a sector, but it fuels other sectors. And so we've seen just how central transportation is to our economic strength as a country. We experienced that in the supply chain crisis, or the supply chain challenges over the course of 2021, kind of coming out of the pandemic. And we know that transportation gets people to work, and it makes our country run, and it creates wealth and opportunity for people. And so that's really how we think about innovation, is how do we support those goals. We also think about, and this is very connected to the idea of how innovation can help support our economy, but we want to win the 21st century. And we want to leverage innovation in transportation to do that. And that is about fueling our economy broadly and making sure that we have a powerful economy where we have the workers that we need to do things that our economy needs. But it's also about creating leadership in emerging sectors, whether we're talking about technologies related to, say, autonomous vehicles, or technologies related to electrification, recognizing that these sectors are going to be global sectors, and we want America to lead in those domains. We also believe that that innovation must support workers, and workers have to be at the table for those conversations. And transportation change and innovation is not something that happens to workers, but something that happens with workers, and should be something that that makes working in the transportation sector, whether you're on the manufacturing side or on the service side, something that is better and easier, and also improves access to jobs for people across our transportation system. We also, in looking at this crowd, I think the other themes of how we think about innovation, whether we're talking about experimentation and learning from failure and the important roles that universities and other partners have in that pursuit, or whether we're talking about creating opportunities to collaborate and the spaces that exist across sectors. And then finally, being flexible and acknowledging that as technologies change, we also are going to have to adapt. And so we don't want to lock ourselves in when we know that how much change there is. And so those are our sort of guiding principles as we think about transportation change. And we bring that to the bipartisan infrastructure law. So at the top line, the bipartisan infrastructure law is a $1.2 trillion package. And about half of those resources go to the Department of Transportation, other resources go to energy, to EPA, to other federal agencies. And the bipartisan infrastructure law is really you have what looks like a transportation reauthorization that we get once every 5 years or so, which helps support state departments of transportation and local transit agencies. But the bipartisan infrastructure law provided a lot more resources for those types of activities, and also provided a ton of resources for new approaches across our transportation system. And so I'll highlight a few of those. So kind of at the highest level, you have hundreds of billions of dollars for state transportation departments, for local transit agencies. You have tens of billions of dollars for projects of regional and national significance, whether you're talking about bridges or intermodal facilities. The largest ever investment, $66 billion in passenger rail. $7.5 billion for vehicle charging, as Gabe was talking about. About $10 billion for clean buses. $8.7 billion for resilient infrastructure that's resilient to climate change. $5 billion for safe streets and roads for all. $1 billion to reconnect communities. $1.7 billion for transit accessibility. The list could go on. The Inflation Reduction Act, which does a ton for transitioning our economy to clean energy across sectors, also doubles down on these things, invests $2 billion in low carbon construction materials in transportation. It doubles down on our efforts to reconnect communities and focus on equity in transportation. It's an incredible time to be working on change in transportation, because maybe for the first time ever, the resources are not or should not be the constraint. And I think that our hope would be that in the arc of how the infrastructure law affects your communities across the country, I think we'd see, I know a lot of you, and we've talked about it, are accessing these programs, but the ideas that are generated and the leadership that is required to bring together new programs, whether we're talking about resilience or electrification or safety, will kind of change the priority set in your communities. So the arc of how the projects that show up on your state transportation plans, your regional transportation plans, will get shaped by the choices that you're making in communities as you approach these new and interesting programs. So I think all these programs end up being oversubscribed, and I'm sure there's been a lot of sweat and tears over that process. There's a number of years coming up in the program, so there's going to be continued opportunities to apply. But think about this as a broader exercise in asserting your values in your transportation system. And I think that will yield the best projects and will be really meaningful and exciting. So I also wanted to talk about technology, knowing that that's a really important theme in this conference, and wanted to talk a little bit about a program that we have called Smart Grants. And so, I talked about these huge numbers, trillions and billions of dollars, and the bipartisan infrastructure law includes $800 million for transportation technology specific activities. And there's a lot of other things that relate to technology, whether we're talking about charging, whether we're talking about supply chain, but there's an $800 million 5-year investment in specific transportation technology deployments in state, local, and tribal communities. And when you put that next to $1.2 trillion, it might feel small, but it's actually the largest ever investment in transportation technology in our country. And I think it's the largest ever investment globally in that type of work. And so we, last month, announced 59 awards through this Smart Grants program, which represents 500 of the $800 million for transportation technology. This is 1 year of awards. It's $95 million or so, so it's the first of 5 years. And all of the grantees are these stage 1 planning and prototyping grants, and they'll have an opportunity to apply for stage 2 implementation grants, which will be in the range of $10, $15 million. These awards are mostly around $2 million. And so our philosophy on transportation technology is that it requires team building, it requires idea generation, and it requires projects to refine and build over time. And I think that's kind of a lesson that has been learned from this space over the course of the last decade or so, when I think there's these grand visionary ideas for large-scale projects, and there can be challenges in implementation. And so the effort here is really to bring projects along at a speed that allows for local support that then can build really strong projects in communities. And I want to talk about kind of some of the themes that emerge from this program. So one theme is safety. And I talked about the roadway fatality crisis. We're supporting projects that support worker safety, so deploying the work zone data exchange, but other projects related to worker safety. We're talking about projects that support safer intersections. And safety is a really critical theme throughout the projects that we're looking at. There's also a set of projects that support transit. I think we all, we've talked about it at the conference today, the challenges that transit faces in different communities as people's work patterns change, and the fact that new models will have to emerge to support transit. And so we invested in a range of projects that support both transit innovation and just, transit systems that are faster and more reliable. So we invested a lot in transit signal priority. We invested in payments efforts, so payments integration across the state level. We invested in projects that will nudge people towards transit as they buy tickets for events. We invested in projects that will allow people with visual impairment to better navigate transit systems. And then the last category of projects are projects that will leverage technology and data to better manage our built environment. And that includes a set of projects that are using sensors and drones to do inspections of physical infrastructure. And it also includes 9 projects across the country that are going to be doing curb management. And most conferences, this would be like this would be the cue for everyone to leave, because the conversation is going to get as boring as they could imagine. But I know for this group, it's like the most exciting thing. And I know there was a session the other day on curb management. So the reason why, and I should say, in general, and I'll talk about sort of some of the reasons why we're excited about curb management, but on Wednesday we had the opportunity to announce a $2 million grant to the city of Portland for their project downtown that's going to focus on a zero emissions delivery zone. And there are 8 other cities across the country that are doing curb management projects. And these projects have been supported and coordinated by a set of really important academic, Nico's team, but also University of Washington and other academic and nonprofit partners, the Open Mobility Foundation. And the projects are going to manage curb space across its many uses: pickup, drop-off, freight delivery, parking, streeteries, all the different things that can be used for curbs. And the reasons why we're excited about curb management, and I'll show you, I think, a map of the projects that we funded through this round of Smart Grants, is kind of 3 reasons. The first is that I think using technology and using data approaches to manage high demand space is sort of like the perfect use case for technology. You have space that's used often inefficiently, and people are queuing up or double parking. It's just a place where we really need to bring more rational approaches. And Mark Twain said, he said, buy land, they're not making any more of it. And I kind of feel like that we can take that and think about it in curb management. Manage the curb, they're not making any more of it. And it's getting, it's become more challenging as we've seen e-commerce take off and all sorts of different use cases at the curb level. And so what we're really excited about is seeing all these communities take on their approaches to curb management. The second reason why it's exciting is because the projects are built on common data standards. And so, the Open Mobility Foundation has been working on curb data specifications, and it's appropriate to talk about this topic in this setting in Portland, which I think, really has been the grandmother and grandfather to some of the most important data standard efforts in the country. So GTFS was born out of this region, and I think we see similarities in things like curb data specifications, and really see opportunities across the transportation system to think about how we can use common data standards and language to talk about problems that exist in communities across the country. And it's not just to help us talk about it, but also to create better ecosystems for private sector partners to come in and provide services, and move away from a business model where technology providers' goal is to have a technology and build a protective moat around their technology, but instead have a technology that can plug in everywhere and where they can scale their technology by introducing it one place and therefore be able to scale it. And then finally, the thing that excites us about curb management comes back to the beginning of what I talked about, which is that these are projects that support all of the policy priorities that we're pushing at the department, whether we're talking about safety, climate, equity, economic strength, because better managing the curb means that people are not biking or walking out in front of traffic to get to their car or to cross the street. It makes it easier to catch the bus and for buses to come on time and access the bus stops. It makes it easier to get deliveries to a business. And so all these things come together and really reflect how real innovation allows for all these important values and policy priorities to come together. And I wanted to close on this idea and sort of maybe express my appreciation for this group, which is that I think that there's this kind of, there's often this battle between the, call it the urbanists, or people who support, safe and sustainable communities, and then the technologists. And I think in the urbanist camp, you have people who believe that the only changes are analog changes to physical infrastructure or social changes to people's behavior. And on the technologist side, there's this notion that technology is going to bail us out of all of our problems, and sort of ignores the livability of a community or the values that a community wants to support. And I really think that this is a false choice and a false debate. And I think that this conference and this community exists at the center of those two dialogues and is really important. I'm not sure there's that many people or that many communities that exist at that center. And so when we invest in our innovation portfolio at DOT, we are seeking to invest at the center of that discussion. And so I really commend all of your work in continuing to kind of add fuel to that fire, because I think it's really important, and it's ultimately how we're going to build markets, and we're going to build and we're going to create change in this space, is through having that dialogue and bridging the gap between the people who want to, for a very important reason, want to see important change in our transportation system, and the forces that we can take advantage of from a technology perspective. So thank you for the time, and if we have time for questions, we'll look forward to it.